2023 was pretty good for me, but I'm not going to act like it wasn't exhausting. I feel like I've earned a bit of a break, so I just want to take some time to reflect. The listicle is a tradition almost as old as YouTube itself, and it's certainly what I grew up watching here. I never really aspired to make my own, but I always did like the idea of Game of the Year. I'm never going to be able to give a deeper dive into every game I play. I don't even think a lot of games would benefit from that kind of dialogue. But I do want to say something about them. I'm not sticking to just 10 though. It's not like I played a lot more than that anyway. I'm sure I can manage to say something. The ranking will be loose and the consistency is out the window, but I'm 𝒔𝒐𝒎𝒄𝒊𝒏𝒈, and here is something about every new game I played in 2023. Now, this list has very few rules, but generally speaking, I only wanted to put in games that I finished. But there were already a couple exemptions I knew I wanted to cover, and I only have to say something, so what could it hurt to include them? Even considering that, I wasn't going to include Hi-Fi Rush. I knew I didn't make it to the end of the game, so I didn't want to be unfair. But looking back at my playtime, I realized I actually put in 7 hours. This either means it was so engrossing it made multiple hours feel like a few, or it was forgettable enough that I forgot about most of my experience already. Instead, let's look at it this way. I don't care about beat-em-ups or spectacle fighters or even rhythm games, really. So considering this game is an amalgam of all of those things, I'd say it's an impressive feat it managed to hold my attention that long. This one really is more of a me thing. I'm not gonna say it's bad, I mean just look at it. I think it basically accomplished what it set out to be. What it set out to be just isn't for me.
No complaining this time.
All right.
Starfield was an interesting flavor of disappointment for me. I never bought into the hype cycle, but I was always at least interested in taking a look at whatever came out of it. I have a lot of problems with the modern Bethesda design philosophy and can sympathize with fans who haven't felt properly served from their franchises since New Vegas. However, I'm a huge Fallout 4 apologist. I'm more or less exactly who they designed that game for. I played for the power curve. I built settlements to put all my cool stuff in, and I made apartments for all my favorite followers. I want sci-fi stories, but if they aren't very deep or only just serve as a backdrop, I'll still have my fun. So when Starfield was shaping up to double down on all of those aspects, I was pretty sure I was going to have a fine time with it. But I didn't. It really is as boring as most people have been claiming. Absolutely everything is diluted to the point of being boring and pointless. Any system that isn't shooting and looting is just not rewarding to engage with for a meaningful amount of time. The settlement system just seems to mock you for even trying to take anything useful out of it by randomly spawning a product 10 times more valuable on every other dusty corpse. The character progression is potentially deeper and even narratively satisfying to an extent, but only at the cost of literally every other type of progression in the game. Perhaps most fatally, the setting and aesthetic can dazzle from a technical perspective all day, but it cannot make me interested or invested in these worlds at all. It is bland, and not in the least bit fun. I can forgive a lot, but no matter how hard I try, all I can see is millions of dollars and countless man-hours put into a product that I find impossible to care about. Mail Time is part of the increasingly popular genre mix of adventure and 3D platformer. I actually have another entry I'll get to later. I only highlight the adventure aspects because it seems to lean more and more on talking to characters to figure out what they need to progress their respective stories. And since this game is themed around being a male person in training, there are a lot of things to deliver. Aside from one of the worst double jumps in gaming history, I don't have any real problems with this game. It's just one of the most basic approaches to this idea. The movement is fine, but not great, and certainly not very expressive. The characters are cute, but don't really have arcs or stories to explore. The world is pleasant and has a vague progression to it, but it can't really facilitate anything more impactful than a walk in the park. It's a pleasant time if you just want something cozy to play on an autumn weekend, but it's not going to offer you a lot more than a passing distraction. I do not play horror games. I don't really even play creepy games. I am susceptible to panic, and I tend to dwell on things for longer than is intended or fun. For the longest time, when I was trying to determine my limit, Oxenfree was the high bar for what I could handle. It is a horror game, but is very much a PG-13 horror, and it isn't overly focused on scaring you every moment you're playing. Instead, what you come for is the dialogue. Alex and her friends are fully voice-acted and have some interesting, if not simple, dynamics you can explore via the unique dialogue system. You are given dialogue choices like you may expect, but not only are they not perfectly representative of what you're going to say, but everything is happening in real time. If you wait, you miss your chance, and if you answer early, most of the time you'll just interrupt the conversation.
Stepbrother.
Really?
Yeah, I know. It's a trip.
Yeah, this is his first night here, so everybody be on your best behavior. Treat him as you would a scary dog. Palms out.
That's, I don't bite. It's fine.
It's not perfect, but putting the flow of conversation into the hands of the player was at least pretty engaging. Alex and her friends goof around on the tourist trap/abandoned military base that is Edwards Island until deciding to play with some weird radio interference that, wouldn't you know it, happens to be some angry ghosts. You run around trying to save your friends, talking and learning about the characters you're stuck with, and try to avoid ghostliness as much as possible. It's a little jankier than I remember, but it's still a good time and a pretty well-told story. The sequel, released in 2023, on the other hand, is kind of a mess in all the worst ways. First off, despite what some marketing and pre-release articles would have you believe, it is very much a direct sequel that relies pretty heavily on you knowing what happened in the first game. The old characters are important, and the old lore is important, and the old island is important, and it's all handled so oddly. In fact, a lot of the problems this game has is how it represents itself as a sequel. The antagonists of the first game are brought back, and discounting the fact that they were pretty much wrapped up in the first game, they really don't have more to offer in terms of the mystery of it all. We know their deal, we know how they work. When it comes to the fear of the unknown, that's pretty much all gone. As for the characters, there is a new cast, but aside from the lead Riley, they all pale in comparison to the first game. Riley actually had the potential to be the most interesting character between the two games, but they just don't utilize her as much as I thought they would. And I actively dislike Jacob, the partner, or the Jonas of this game, which is a pretty big problem considering how much you're stuck with him and how much more time the game wastes. A major problem I had with the first game is it really seemed to expect you would be making multiple passes through the game to get different character outcomes and interactions, but the game is just too slow for me to fathom doing that in any kind of short succession. It also had a few pieces of side content, like a scavenger hunt and some collectibles, that I had no desire to get. The stories in these games are not so constant that every moment is eventful, so in the downtime there is often dialogue to fill the journeys in between plot points. They are usually pretty well written, but the dialogue system is built for walking and talking. But during the side content there is none of that going on, and when there is no dialogue happening, there is no enjoyment happening. I come for the story of these games. I want to see these characters make it through the plot presented. So when I say the sequel has easily 5 to 6 times more optional content and a much bigger world to traverse through, you can see the issue. Every time the game brought up these optional quests, the characters would remark, "Well, there's a lot of dangerous and time-sensitive things going on, but I guess if you want to do this, it might help." And after this happened a couple times, I thought, no game, you're right, I have much better things to be doing, and proceeded to ignore it. The pacing for the plot is just all over the place, and I feel like it even tried to account for the time you might be spending doing these optional things, but instead it just feels like I missed plot beats because we were rushing. There is a secondary antagonist I swear I just straight up missed the introduction for, because I'm suddenly on a first-name basis with them after only about 10 minutes past the inciting incident. Not to mention the ending. Without spoiling it too much, the moral quandary the ending has is presented awkwardly and is just overall so confusing, I don't know what to make of it. It's bad, and I would love to hear the justification for what's going on. Overall, 𝒔𝒐𝒉𝒊𝒈 2 is just a confused sequel that took all of the best parts of the first game and utilized them in the most clunky and awkward ways possible. And even when trying, new things often got lost in the scope or in ideas no one would care about. I said something, not say a lot. Return to Dreamland was always one of the most basic versions of the superstar formula, which means there's basically nothing wrong with it, but there is also basically nothing to get excited about. I continue to find it funny that the only franchise that can make me do motion inputs is Kirby, and the new mech ability is a great example of that. They added nearly an entire party game's worth of minigames with single-player progression, which is wild and kinda neat. The post-game side mode is interesting because it adapts Kirby gameplay to not only an RPG, but a combo chaining challenge, so it really doesn't feel like the base experience, and that's great. But what can I say? Not only is it Kirby, it's over a decade old Kirby whose design goal was to keep the formula basic to onboard new players. It's fine. My perception of Dredge is largely tainted with how I left the game. I do remember liking the beginning, cruising around the little bay I felt comfortable in, catching fish, and scrambling home before the fog rolled in. But by the end, I was just tired and glad to be done with it, forgetting I had a DLC I could do, but obviously didn't. I don't know what I missed, but I had a hard time engaging with this game. Its systems were fine, but it felt like a lot of it was built to open up to much greater and more fun things, and it just never did. The spooky stuff never gets more intimidating than your first couple of run-ins with some of the bigger monsters, and does at one point basically fall off a cliff. The upgrade system was cool in theory, but a lot of the upgrades were just keys to unlock the same thing you were doing somewhere else, or were such an incremental change they were hardly worth bothering until you could skip a few notches in the tree at once. There were side quests and mysteries and bigger set pieces, but after I realized it all boiled down to sailing to a spot, occasionally waiting out the night, and playing the same fishing game I mastered 10 minutes into starting, I found it really hard to engage with. So, correct me if I'm wrong, but most people who knew about this game pre-release were disappointed when it launched, right? Terra Nil sells itself as a game where you visit an ecologically destroyed planet and work to revive it. Cleanup games are always going to find a solid niche, and this one was explicitly a save the environment affair, which I guess does fall under escapism these days. The problem is kind of invisible until you play it. Seeing this footage, you are probably thinking this is a kind of city builder, which is actually kinda great. A city builder is usually so focused on reaping the environment of its resources and paving over it. So then, this is not only a tonal reversal, but a mechanical one too. And you're about half right. It does technically function like a city builder. A lot of the UI elements and game verbs are lifted from that genre, but I'm going to go ahead and say this is far more explicitly a puzzle game. After the first stage, it is easy to approach a level in a way that leaves it unbeatable. Sometimes you just weren't efficient enough, and other times you didn't balance out the ecosystems to get the results you needed. Choices you made in the opening minutes of a level could basically softlock you an hour down the line. Another thing that makes it more puzzle game than city builder is the stage progression. This game is level-based, and while some are pretty long, none of them are much longer than an hour. There is a clear goal to get your infrastructure out of a self-sustaining ecosystem. I like that it's not just a game of endless expansion and growth, but because everything is so deterministic, I think this is the coldest and most efficient I've ever been with a city builder system. I can honestly say I felt more for the environment of my evil, resource-sucking, sprawling monsters because I was with them for longer and had to roll with whatever problems my planning or the environment gave me, instead of just starting over. Storyteller is a puzzle game where you have to place story archetypes in their scenes appropriately to get the outcome the game wants. Well, appropriately isn't exactly right. The game doesn't care where you put these archetypes, only that you get the ending the scene is asking for. Want the handsome prince to get with the local witch instead of the princess? Go for it. Or do you just want to leave him out of it entirely and let the ladies live happily ever after? If all the game requires is a wedding, then the way you go about it is up to you. It is still a puzzler, though. The archetypes will mostly do what their roles have always been throughout literary history. Solutions can be pretty simple cause and effect, but because the pieces of the puzzle are more conceptual, contemplating the solutions is more of an argument with yourself over interpretations of the scene. Is the coward going to let the damsel die because they are always to play the coward? Or can I change the scene so this is actually an underdog story? I'm willing to bet if you heard about this game, it's because it sparked a bit of a debate over the worth of a game's length. It is true I 100%ed this game in just over 2 hours, but let me tell you, I am so willing to pay for an experience that I am not going to be sick of by the end. I got exactly what I wanted from this game, and it didn't overstay its welcome. A big reason I'm only saying something about these games is because I'm not really going about it fairly if I'm reviewing them. I played them. Sometimes it's not more than that. I'm not taking everything into account, and Remnant 2 is a huge example of this. I don't care about a lot of Remnant 2. It has a hub I actively tried to avoid, it has numerous voiced cutscenes I'm only sitting through to get objective markers, and tons of writing and lore I couldn't care less about. However, none of that is the game's fault, that's just how I played it. What I can say is that this game is awesome. Remnant 2 was one of the very rare games that intersected interests with one of my close friends, so it was the first game in years I was able to play co-op. This is the reason I didn't engage with so much of it. I was there to hang out with a friend, and the main gameplay loop was what kept us there. This is essentially a dungeon crawler. All the loots, enemies, puzzles, lore, and bosses that would entail, with the major hook being guns. The genre with guns thing can very easily wear thin, but the balance is done very thoughtfully here. The third-person gunplay is snappy and satisfying, but there are additional mechanics that serves the dungeon crawler enemy design well, like a generous dodge roll and a quick and handy melee that is on par if not better than your guns. Character building and RPG elements are not left out either, with plenty of loot with stats and even a class system that unlocks perks and weapon mods that can really change how you play the game. It may just be because I was playing this as a goof-off game with my friend, but this game feels practically indulgent in some aspects. The world design is what sticks out the most. The multiversal aspect of the narrative feels like a big excuse to put as many different settings and themes in this game as possible. There is an absolute refusal to maintain a style for the environments you visit. It really is just the greatest hits of stereotypical game environments and aesthetics. They are all pretty shallow, but if they were any deeper, they would risk bogging down the experience and preventing the players from moving to the next fantastical scene. This feels like an incredibly honest game. It wants to get you playing with your friends in cool-looking worlds, shooting fun guns and casting magic at hordes of enemies and intimidating bosses, while one of you is dressed as an eldritch priest and the other is a cowboy. You get what the back of the box promises, and that's more than enough. 𝒔𝒐𝒎𝒆𝒕𝒉𝒊𝒏𝒈 opens by telling you that 𝒔𝒐𝒎𝒄 is a French nautical term for a receding tide. Then it shows you this. I feel like that is pretty much all I needed. I don't know why the game then proceeds to throw thousands of words into these text logs when none of them can say something more powerful than the environment and gameplay can. In 𝒔𝒐𝒎𝒄, you climb. The gravity mechanics are fluid and satisfying, and just a tip, way faster than you think. The jump is a little weird and hard to get used to, but makes a lot more sense when you start to learn about your tether. Anytime you climb, this tether is automatically secured to give you some point to safely return to. You can actually set up more points along the way too, as a kind of checkpoint system. For a majority of the game, I was treating it just like that. Slowly climbing my way through this beautiful yet haunting abandoned civilization, learning how to use the jump, where exactly I could grab things, and eventually even manipulating the environment with my adorable pet ass. But then I started playing with the tether more, and that is when I realized this has some of the slickest climbing mechanics I've seen in a game. The tether isn't just a safety net, you can also rappel and swing off of it too. Those checkpoints suddenly just become anchors for the most optimal and sometimes even sequence-breaking levels of swings. 𝒔𝒐𝒎𝒕 can be a quiet walk through a desolated environment, but after walking through these dead reef-like rock formations and solemn abandoned houses, only for the game to throw some text logs around to tell me that it was bad the water was gone, was seriously illusion-breaking. I lost that emotional connection. I get that they had more to convey than just a dire tone, but I thought the sound design of their memory conches and the art of their murals did just fine expanding on that. The writing was too much. So by the time I was a decent way up the tower and was finding logs about how people made these month-long journeys that I just cleared in a handful of hours, I couldn't read them as anything other than admission of skill issues. 💔💐💏 is a beautiful game with some interesting climbing mechanics and some amazing rope physics. If it had put a little bit more faith in the player and maybe leaned away from its texts for getting the story across, I think it could have been one of the greats among the melancholy, pretty world explory games. Yeah. 💔💐💏 is the RNG puzzle game. Your selection of tools are randomized, the selection of levels are randomized, the elements in those levels are randomized, even the credits are randomized. Does that mean it's so finely crafted that any selection of tools can beat any selection of levels? No! But that's kind of the fun of it. The tools are fun to use, the platforming is solid, and with how systemic the gameplay is, I think it would just be best to show you some of the slick stuff you can pull off in this game. Fall of Porcupine is bad because it made me talk about Night in the Woods for my second video ever. It's lucky to be this high. The other entry I have in the 3D platformer adventure game genre is Smooshy Come Home. This game looks and plays out just like a lot of the stories I would read in grade school. A cute little mushroom guy named Smooshy gets abducted by a bird and separated from his family. When he escapes, Smooshy isn't even sure where home is, so they need to talk to the other plants and woodland creatures to find their way. All the core elements of the game are done really well here. The art is clean and cute even with the chunkiest of pixel filters, the writing captures that storybook sense of adventure, and the tone is solid, giving off those childlike vibes while also grounding itself enough to not break immersion. Most importantly, the platforming is fluid and engaging. The classic jump and glide is here, but Smooshy also gains access to these climbing hooks early on. With them, you can latch onto almost any surface and jump again. It's not as mindless as your typical double jump because you still need to find a surface, but it's also not as limiting as something like a wall kick because the surface you choose doesn't have to be very close to your destination. The adventure game progression is different here, too. The dialogue is still important, but it might be more accurate to say this is Metroidvania-inspired design. Quests and dialogue can unlock more traversal tools and more keys to other areas. It allows the world to unfold in a more satisfying way and feels a lot more involved than just having the quests themselves be the progression. It was a cozy yet engrossing little game that had me unable to put it down until I knew Smooshy and his family would be reunited again. So, I never really got into the new Super Mario Bros. Hate. I was the perfect age for the DS original, and even looking back now, I don't think you could have done it much better. It was an early DS game reviving Mario's core idea that hadn't really been seen since Mario World nearly 2 decades prior. It was great, and 𝒔𝒐𝒏𝒈 was a full-blown console sequel that came out 3 years later. It was a cultural phenomenon right alongside the Wii, and was one of the only times my mother was aware of a game because she heard about it through people that weren't me. It all really comes to 𝒔𝒐𝒏𝒈 and U releasing the same year. I haven't played 2 recently enough to recall anything noteworthy about it, but I feel like even the general population has softened on U being one of the most refined Mario gameplay experiences to date. I liked them all, and I think for the most part they were all justified worthy entries to the Mario catalog. So, consider all that when I say I think Super Mario Wonder is just another Mario game. Wonder is being talked about like it's a revolutionary thing for Mario and even platformers at large. I like the game a lot, but I don't think it's as big as a departure as some people think it is. I'm having such a problem expressing this because I did like the previous games, and the most negative thing I can say about this game is that it really is just another one. Now, I'm not trying to be obtuse, I know there are improvements. Hell, the game not kicking you out to the map every time you die might be worth the price of admission alone. The world map overall has been dramatically improved, and the badge system is a really fun, if not a little cheesy, way to change up how to play a level. It's good. Really good. I just want to make it clear I don't think the gameplay is as big as a step as it seems. However, the reason Mario Wonder is getting all of this praise is because they did more or less master one thing: presentation. That one thing may as well be everything. The music, the sound design, the art style, the particle effects, the framing devices, and of course, the wonder. This game has a style in a way I don't think any other 2D Mario game could touch, especially the 𝒔𝒐𝒏𝒈 series. It's such a dramatic shift, I'm not surprised when people claim it's their favorite in the series. It's a non-stop style ride from start to finish. When it comes to 2D platformers, Mario has never been my favorite, but he is almost always a good baseline. I feel that a lot of platformers surpassed what the 𝒔𝒐𝒏𝒈 series set as a baseline, and it is nice to see Mario hold himself up to that bar and clear it with ease once again. When it comes to Viewfinder, I feel like I have to start with this clip that was shared around.
What's an old photograph doing here? Hang on, did you just shift reality?
Yeah, that is pretty bad, and I really don't even think it should be defended. There is a lot of writing like that in the first third, but I also don't think it should be judged on that alone. The writing does get better, or at the very least, less present, and the rest of the game is just outstanding. This is one of the most interesting and clever puzzle games I've played in a while. The picture mechanic itself is great, but aside from exploring that concept to the fullest, so much more is added with the concept of perspective and portable spaces. Whole levels and ideas can just be placed in front of you in the blink of an eye, and it is quite a thing to be able to mess with yourself. A tendency some of these extremely unique mechanical games come across is that the mechanic itself is so foreign that once the basic explanation of it is played out for the audience, there isn't much more puzzle to it. Superliminal, for example, felt like a game that spent its whole runtime showing off what it could do with its perspective puzzles, and less about how intricate you can make a puzzle involving those mechanics. I feel Viewfinder is not that way, especially if you are doing the optional levels, which, by the way, do the optional levels please. They are almost all the best puzzles in the game. The mechanics are impressive, the puzzles get respectfully deep, and the pacing is great. It knows how to up the ante, and it knows when it's time to end, so that the most memorable experience is all that you're left with.
Shall we continue onward?
If it's not clear by now, I enjoy myself a cozy little experience that doesn't ask too much but still tries to get you to engage with the mechanics it gives attention. 𝒔𝒐𝒎𝒄𝒕𝒉𝒊𝒏𝒈 is my highlight of this style, despite a couple glaring issues I have with it. You are some corporate jobber that is tasked with cleaning this section of ocean that the company you work for has been devastating for years. It's a framing device so loose you can actually turn it off in the menu, but it's also so non-intrusive I don't see the point in doing so. You go to these areas, collect trash, zap goop, and suck microplastics until you've cleaned the area 100%. Like so many other cleaning games, this one lives and dies by making something terrible and boring sound actually fun, and it succeeds in that area. Moving around an underwater space is fun, with the addition of a little jet function and these placeable boost rings that make pathing to your task and back its own little metagame. The auto-aim on the zapper is a little brainless, but that also means this game handles like butter on a controller. The more you clean and the more methods of cleaning you gain, and the messier the areas you have to clean get. It's a really engaging system that kept me hooked until the end, but there is a little problem with the game's structure overall. Have you noticed something odd I haven't mentioned? That something would be the namesake of this game, the �𝒐𝒎𝒄𝒕𝒉𝒊𝒏𝒈 themselves. The �𝒔𝒎𝒄𝒕𝒉𝒊𝒏𝒈 are the indigenous life present in this ocean. Each cleaning area offers a few for you to rescue, and after a certain level of cleanliness they can be reintroduced to their home to live and breed naturally. The problem is that despite being the reason for this game's existence, they just don't feel that important. It's not as if there is no depth to their mechanics. There is breeding, a happiness and mood system, a host of natural and prepared foods to give your �𝒕𝒉𝒊𝒏𝒈, and even toys they can play with. It's just that so little of it is needed to progress through the game. Unless customization and connection to cute little things is the point of the game, I will optimize the emotion right out of it. Even something as aesthetic as Animal Crossing lacks some substantial progress behind the interaction of villagers. I want to engage with these cute little guys, but I'm also a dumb gamer and needs to be forced to do so in some way. If you want it to be, �𝒕𝒕𝒉𝒊𝒏𝒈 is an ecosystem builder where you can breed your favorite color and style of �𝒕𝒕𝒉𝒄𝒕, populate an entire area with them, make them their favorite foods, and play with them. That's all in the game. But for me, it's a fun little cleaning sim with cutesy graphics and animals on the side, and it earns its place here based on that alone. I just can't help but feel like with a little wordplay and some cleverly designed framing, I could have been made to appreciate this game on an entirely greater level. In terms of peaks and valleys, no game had higher highs and lower lows for me this year than Novalands. Another style of game that is seemingly having its moment right now is the grindy perpetual progress game. You could say farming sims have this to a degree, but the reference that fits even closer is that of Forager. Tons of things to unlock, find, and progress to, but it's all in service of the grind. Grinding is often given nothing but negative connotation, but anyone familiar with games like these, or where it is even more prevalent, MMOs, knows that there is an art and a comfort to it. Grind at a thing that lets you unlock a thing that lets you grind at a thing slightly better. You get the idea. Novalands is very much one of those games. You have a do-everything gun that mines, farms, kills, and whatever else you need it to. Some rudimentary crafting and an absolutely massive unlock tree that reveals more and more complexity. You unlock islands that go from places to survive to places to conquer and extract resources from. The early game so closely resembles the style of Forager, I would say it borders on stealing until a few hours in when you can unlock robots. It is only then that the game goes from a grind 'em up to an automation game. I was actually quite surprised and a little worried by this shift. A lot of those aforementioned grindy games are a natural fit for consoles, but automation games, not so much. Automation games stray a lot closer to strategy and city builder games in terms of execution and control, so to get an automation game that feels good to play with a controller is quite a feat. The automation is impactful too, making tasks that previously took your full attention completely out of your hands. The expansion and systemic balance of resources becomes the main task you are responsible for, and the actual work is left to your bots. It's a system that works incredibly well, and those are the highs. Unfortunately, this game suffers heavily from the optimization issue that most automation games struggle with. Making the game more challenging means making the player optimize their system, and at some point that becomes less and less fun. This game's halt of fun is right here with these crystals that greatly increase efficiency. This is more or less the late game thing to be doing, but these crystals are only found in this space minigame that is an absolute vacuum of fun, and far worse, exceptionally prone to crashing. In a game where the only way to save manually is to quit out and come back, it's near unforgivable how big of a gamble playing this minigame is. I have lost upwards of 4 hours to this process alone, and I eventually had enough. I know there have been updates, but I have no clue if they have actually fixed this issue, so I guess play the Switch version at your own risk. It's a weird way to leave the game, but ultimately, if I can enjoy an automation process on console so much that it's running like this, I can forgive the crashing a little. It's practically a compliment at some point. The SteamWorld series is an interesting one for gaming because it more or less lacks a main character and, stranger yet, refuses to tie itself to one genre. The philosophy seems to be approach a popular genre, strip it down to its simplest parts, apply their style to those refined core parts, and maybe do a little branching out from there. SteamWorld Build is no different, despite being from a new developer. Critically speaking, this means that just about all of their games only really scratch the surface whenever it comes to their respective genres. Build is a city builder, but there's only about a handful of resources to manage and 3 tiers of advancements before you're done. It's not very hard to beat a scenario, and on normal, I don't even think there's a formal lose state. However, this simplicity is often great for approaching new genres. If SteamWorld has covered a genre of games you are unfamiliar with but interested in, I would say there are few better starting points. That simplicity also allows them to focus on what to add to the genre they are tackling, and Build wanted not only to cover city building, but also dungeoneering. There is a second half to this game that is this dungeon builder with light tower defense mechanics. In these caverns, you construct units that help you expand and descend to lower levels, and harvest different materials for your city above. The SteamWorld games I've played have all had this incredible loop of doing one task until it becomes tedious or too difficult, then switching over to some secondary task to break up that flow. Build essentially lets you play 2 different games at once. You can spend time building out your city, growing your various populations, and making your productions more efficient. Then, when you're getting strained on resources or upgrade parts, you can check in on the mines. It's a wonderful back and forth that will never leave you waiting for something to get done when you're playing well. Even if you want to take it slower, nothing too bad is going to happen as a result of poor play. I also appreciate that this is a city builder where you can finish a scenario in under 10 hours, which to some will be more than enough to get their fill. To the rest, there are a full 5 maps and different difficulties to try out. At the end of the day, it's a SteamWorld game. Of course it's quality. 𝒔𝒐𝒎𝒆𝒕𝒉𝒊𝒈 is a game so confident it can sell its world and tone, it opens with child murder, then lets you do backflips and trick shots on your motorbike. The fact I was still able to take it seriously after getting introduced to the gameplay is a testament to how well they did. I'm not too well versed in the kind of post-apocalypse �𝒐𝒎𝒆𝒕𝒉𝒊𝒈 is invoking. Its style is mostly Mad Max, but its writing is something else. Where it counts, I was really able to get invested in the dynamic between Laika, her mother, and her daughter, all set against the gameplay of bike race freestyle. I kid, but the story and gameplay are actually tied together quite well. This is a world of violence and death, and Laika's family is cursed with immortality. She is free of the consequence of death, but as a result is burdened by the responsibility of causing more violence. The world is a desert, and the cues taken from Mad Max to sell the bike as a natural component of that world pays off. It all feeds back into Laika and her role. The setting is brutal, and she is the only one that can take it as well as dish it out. The mobility her bike gives her and the cool gunplay and bullet time effects we get to use make her deadly, but only about on par as deadly as the rest of the world. The beasts she slays, the pain she feels, the lives she takes, and the friends she loses all impact her just as it would anyone else. It would feel odd if she were to continue doing it without the drive to prevent her daughter from carrying the same burden. It's hard to pass judgment on a game that is taking itself this seriously with gameplay this outlandish and fun. It's not something that will sit well with everyone, but it worked for me because of the genre conventions being played to and the thoughtful attention to attempting to reconcile these two opposing ideals. It's still not perfect as a game. The crafting and cooking feel like they take up way too much of your time, and although I like the concepts and framing of the side quests, this world is too big and too stingy on fast travel to justify making you run around it multiple times to complete them. But I still did everything I could find to do because when all the pieces are working together, this game feels amazing to play, and the story and world motivate me to stay and improve it as much as I could. Pizza Tower is the best 2D platformer in a year that had a Super Mario Bros. Entry. The bar for 2D platformers is astronomical. It's by far the genre gaming is most experienced in, yet Pizza Tower still manages to stand out. Talking about a game like this is a bit of a disservice because everything it wants you to know about it is felt in the actual play of the game. The controls are smooth and simple to grasp, but the movement quickly gets manic. The game works at any pace, but was absolutely designed for breakneck speeds. The faster you can manage to play this game, the more fun it is. The whole world just invites this goofy, no-holds-barred approach. Everything is sloppy and greasy and looks like it was drawn in MS Paint. It's amazing. It's fun to watch, but when you're actually playing it, it is so easy to get lost in this game's attitude. I had a great time getting to the end, and even then I was so ready to stay in this world, I even tried some of the more ridiculous challenges. I didn't even come close to getting any, but that probably won't stop me from giving it another try in the future. 𝒔𝒐𝒎𝒆𝒕𝒉𝒊𝒏𝒈 is what I consider to be the not-so-hidden gem of 2023. I have never seen anything about this game aside from the word of mouth it got. It was never going to get more than that, and yet I feel like it's still the sleeper hit of the year. 𝒔𝒐𝒎𝒆𝒕𝒉𝒊𝒏𝒈 is a 3D platformer that puts faith in you to figure it out. It starts very simple with some pretty stiff-feeling movement and jumping until you unlock your first power, the slide. Then, movement makes a little bit more sense. The jumping still doesn't feel right though, not until you find the wall kick. That completely cracks your vertical options wide open. And the game just keeps going like this until your movement kit feels like an extension of yourself that's always been there. It gets crazy, to the point where you are chaining several actions before you're even hitting the floor. It's not just that it feels good, the game needs you to feel that way so you really experiment with those moves. There are points in this game that I still don't know how I was supposed to traverse, because my own jank set of moves worked just fine for me. Was I really supposed to get the height I needed by jumping off of a door frame? I doubt it, but the game let me do it anyway. The controls are great, but all of this really only works because of the world you're in. This fantastical haunted castle and its connected zones are a platforming wonderland. The things they invite you to try just enforce the best parts of its mechanics, and more importantly help you learn to navigate this twisted world. From the beginning, the world is completely open to you, if you can physically reach it. Progress in this game comes down to if you can navigate the obstacles and gaps it puts in your way. You still absolutely need those powers, but you also need to figure out where to put them to use yourself. The game will show you what you can do, but it's up to you to apply it in the right spot to get to where you need to go. It's easy to get lost, and there is more than enough backtracking, but it's a small price to pay for this level of freedom and trust. Okay, obligatory whatever Annapurna published this year time. They really know how to pick 'em, and this year it's Geometric Interactive's Cocoon. Cocoon is my favorite game this year that you could play with an Atari controller. I mean, probably. One stick and one button is all you need to navigate the world, solve the puzzles, and even fight bosses. It's not as basic as it sounds though. There are a ton of contextual actions that make for some really interesting puzzle setups. But if you have seen this game at all, you've likely seen the big one. Each of these orbs is a whole world that you can traverse between at these gates. The game uses this very cleverly, but it still makes it kinda hard to picture what it's actually like to play this game. Between all the pre-release footage I saw, it was hard to determine what made playing this game more involving than just moving balls. The first is context. There are plenty of elements that allow you to perform an action other than picking up an orb. The second is something I really think could have sold a lot more people if it was made more obvious. That being that each of these orbs has a unique mechanic tied to it. The one I'll point out is the first that reveals these chromatic paths, but later ones get far more involved. The puzzle design is great and very tight. The game is actually very quick to close doors behind you and block paths so you can focus on whatever alien contraption is in front of you to progress. Exploration is downplayed quite a bit, and if you play this, don't worry about missing things for completion. It's pretty easy to clean up later. All that is well and good, but I have to talk about the real reason this game is this high. Except I don't, because it's exactly what you're looking at. This game has some of the most incredible sci-fi art I've ever seen, especially in a game. It is sharpened down to the razor's edge, so you are only seeing what the devs want you to see. The game is in charge of the camera, so all you have to do is watch. It's really trying to depict places that feel like they weren't meant to be comprehended. You walk through these massive, unending wonders, then the game pulls you out and you pick them up. Great sci-fi isn't about having deep, complex explanations to the fiction you create. It's about implying the shape of a world and letting the audience fill in the gaps. There isn't a lick of text in this game, but there are visuals that have a story. Every element is carefully crafted and often just as animated and alive as you are. It gives such a clear and detailed look at the pieces of this world that you can't help but chase the peripheries of your vision to keep looking for more, and showing you any more than what I have would take that away from you. I believe my first reaction to seeing Goodbye Volcano High was, oh yeah, this is exactly the type of twee garbage I'll obsess over for a month. And I was exactly right. Apparently, if you put animal characters dealing with some form of existential dread in a band, there's a good chance it's a Game of the Year contender for me. I'm not exactly what you would call a visual novel aficionado. I've only played a couple over the years, so I don't know if the genre has just really upped its game, or if Goodbye Volcano High is just that much of a leap in quality, because just look at this game.
Is this wild or what? I finally get to see worm trauma in its natural habitat. Even got some VIPs waiting for a meet and greet before soundcheck.
Please, no autographs.
Too bad, I'm gonna need one.
The sheer amount of bespoke and canned animations on display is stunning. Goodbye Volcano High is fully voice acted and makes the interesting decision to have automatic text progression on by default. The result is you have a 6-hour animated drama that you get to be a part of. The sound design, the UI, the shot composition, pacing, the acting, and, of course, the animation is all in harmony here. It's honestly one of the most immersive experiences I've played this year. It really was like watching a movie I was also in. The mechanical suspension of disbelief has been carved away so efficiently here. As for the story, I'll say it's not the least bit subtle. You play as dinosaurs, this is the title and this is the logo. Themes of existentialism and endings are very present in every aspect of the story. But it says a lot when you can still develop characters you want to keep watching 6 hours later, even with these themes being present from the beginning. Watching all these characters grapple with their futures, or even redefining what the future means to them, is such a touching thing to watch. The story knows it's okay to just let you linger with these characters for a while, but the writing is no slouch when it wants to draw out those emotions. Although, let's be real, it's not going to be just the writing that makes you feel those feelings. Our main character, Fang, is a songwriter, and we have to play their songs. If you had told me that the game that had my heart rushing the most this year was a visual novel, I think I would have laughed. But then you get there, and... was it worth it all? If I've learned anything from the games that I've played in 2023, it's that when it comes to making me connect with games, it's all about context and cohesion. A good, strong context can take you pretty far in a game, but if you can follow through and tie mechanics to that context, it makes the experience truly engaging. I've been watching Fang's story, and I made a few decisions here and there, but I wasn't connected to the character until I had to play their songs. The rhythm game isn't terribly deep, but it's the perfect amount of deep to allow you to keep the context in your head. It gives you just enough room to watch Fang shine in between those notes, or to panic after a slipped note so you can just recover in time for the next one. It's not flawless, it didn't change my life or anything, but the goal of a game like this should be to immerse you in its story and make you form attachments to its characters. And it's been a long time since a game accomplished those goals so well. The Tower of Babel is an origin myth and parable meant to explain why the world's peoples speak different languages. According to the story, a united human race speaking a single language and migrating eastward comes to the land of Shinar. There, they agree to build a city and a tower with its top in the sky. Their god, Yahweh, observing their city and tower, confounds their speech so they can no longer understand each other and scatters them around the world. But what if the people continued to live in the town just as a fractured and different peoples? Well, then you'd basically get Chants of Sennaar. Chants of Sennaar would probably make it pretty far on my list even if it ended after the first section of the game. You are some mysterious outsider trying to ascend the tower, only to find you don't know how to speak the language of the people that live there. On the first floor, you learn many of the ways you will be deducting the languages of the tower. You may find the meaning of words based on the context clues in the environment, or the actual symbology of the written characters. When you think you have a pretty good idea of what the word means, you can write it in your journal and your guess will show up in a text bubble whenever that word is present. It won't tell you if you are right, but even just having it there really helps the process of figuring out what's what. With enough of the language figured out, even the conversations with the locals can give you useful clues as to what is being said. You make your way through a modest 30-word-ish language, finally being able to understand how to move up to the next floor, only to find there is a whole new people and language to learn about. This is where the game went from being a fun puzzle game to an experience about the art of translation. Because now, not only do you have the previous methods of deducting the written language, but also the interplay between languages. And just when you think you have that down, you find the next language. And it doesn't even form sentences the way the past one did. Direct translations make them sound like Yoda. You have plurals and ownership and emotions and numbers that can all be applied in different ways. There are terms in some languages that other languages straight up don't have. Then you realize this isn't just about the raw skill of translation, it's also about localization. Now, I'm strictly a one-language kind of guy, and if you've watched this far, you know it's debatable I even have a handle on that to begin with. I couldn't care less about the story, and the puzzles range from fine to tedious, but I really got something from this game. I always knew that translation was difficult. I have tried my hand at learning other languages before, but I have a newfound appreciation for translation, and really anyone skilled enough to know more than one language now. I can think of a lot of games that played better or that I enjoyed more, but very few games that informed my understanding, and for that, this game deserves to be celebrated and remembered. This year had a lot of sequels to talk about. Oxenfree 2 is a direct sequel, Mario Wonder and Kirby, entries into much larger franchises, and even SteamWorld Build and Starfield share DNA and a legacy with the games that precede them. And I'm sure I'd be talking about another sequel if I had the funds to afford the platform it was on. Completely unrelated, did you know I have a Patreon? Patreon.com/RyRoyal. Yes, each video I release gets a companion piece over there, and if you like listening to me talk favorites, you can join and watch a video about my favorite YouTube videos of 2023. Not to mention you'll have access to all of the previous bonus things I've done. So if you want to support, go on over to patreon.com/RyRoyal. I would greatly appreciate it. But, in all seriousness, my last 2 games are sequels that have interesting relationships with their previous iterations, so let's get to the one you were probably waiting for. I can't imagine being tasked with following up Breath of the Wild, one of the most popular and critically received games in history, with a direct sequel. There are so many things to address. What do you change to make it new? What do you keep to make it authentic? I honestly didn't think they were going to be able to capture the magic of exploration the first game had. To say they captured it is almost an understatement because they didn't just go for parallel beats, they knew what would hit. They tried for as much new as possible. Reusing the map was a choice that garnered a lot of criticism, but I felt that revisiting these places that had become like a second home to me was a whole new kind of exciting. And for as much as I appreciated the new stuff added to the old map, I found a lot of comfort in what was familiar. There are so many new and different mechanics it actually can feel a bit overwhelming. When given so many new avenues of exploration and so many interesting things on the horizon, it is kinda nice to be able to visit these places you know and reorient yourself before determining your next goal. But the old overworld isn't all that we have to explore. The sky was what was promised to us in the advertising and pre-release, and I have to say, it was a bit underwhelming. I expected a lot more areas like the Great Sky Island you start out on, but a lot of the sky just ended up feeling like bonus content. I really like how so much of it was just as interesting to get to as it was to explore though, so maybe that's all it needed to be. Speaking of pre-release stuff, I had always theorized that we would get underground areas to explore in addition to the sky, and we got that, in the form of caves. When I was picturing the grand game they were promising, I was basically picturing exactly what they did with the caves. Little new areas that are expanded on something that felt like always could have been there in the first game. The caves are great, but the depths are incredible. If I had to give awards to individual concepts in gaming, this year the depths would win without contest. It is such a cool escalation to everything the Breath of the Wild format offered. It's a land just as big as Hyrule, but all new. But it's not just Hyrule again, it's an inverted Hyrule. Figuring out the way these places are linked is just as interesting as finding the new stuff. The enemies are the same, but they are always more dangerous in the depths. The shrines are in the same place, but now they function as sources of light, revealing massive chunks of the world to you at a time. Any town or key location you knew from the original map has a new thing to discover beneath it. Even the landscape itself is inverted. The highs are now lows and the lows are now highs. Everything about the atmosphere in the depths is inverted and eerie. The music isn't calm and natural, it's atonal and electrical. The foliage is rocky and alien. There really isn't life here besides what is hostile to you. It's a lot more sparse in general, with a lot more empty open spaces between points of interest. But even this is an intentional and wonderful element too. The depths is, more than anywhere else, where you are going to want to build. Getting across this threatening, desolate land is a lot easier and more fun while riding one of your lopsided, wobbly custom vehicles. Without the depths, I honestly don't know if the vehicle building would have made a lot of sense for this game. It's awkward and takes a lot of time and resources before it becomes really useful in the old overworld, but the depths make it immediately worthwhile. All of this praise for the depths without mentioning the dark. Darkness mechanics seem to be a very divisive thing in gaming, but I almost always enjoy them. It was absolutely my favorite part to reveal and explore. If you'll allow, let me share a little anecdote about one of my favorite trips to the depths. It was here near the starting point of the last game, the Great Plateau. I fell down a chasm into what looked like a room at the end of a hallway. I had only been to a couple other points in the depths so far, and I was still pretty worried about any encounters there. The only other thing around the area I could light were some vehicle parts. I cobbled together a goofy four-wheeler and carefully made my way down the hallway, looking for another light route. It was awkward and bumpy, and I only lit as much of the path as I needed to, but mostly I got by the light source I placed directly onto my vehicle. I tumbled and fell all over what seemed to be a pretty well-defined path, even if it was never meant to be traversed by an obelisk on wheels. I eventually found a nearby light route and activated it, only for it to reveal this. There are plenty of structures in the depths, but this is one of the bigger ones. But what was more amazing is, I had already made my way through a majority of it. I drove through nearly this entire abandoned city, and I didn't even know it. There's a lot more to Tears of the Kingdom, and the way it held itself as a sequel is interesting to me, even if it isn't always perfect. But I will remember some of the moments it created forever. And my game of the year is Pikmin 2. It did technically get a remastered release this year, so it counts. Did you think I really included Kirby because I wanted to talk about Kirby? Because I did. I do like Kirby. But I also did it so I could further justify this. Ask me what my all-time favorite game is, and 6 days a week I'll tell you it's Pikmin 2. There is not a game on this earth I am more nostalgic for. Pikmin 1 was great and all, but 2 was a journey, and as a kid that hated letting Pikmin die more than anything, this game was an emotional experience. Like all things in Pikmin 2, it all came down to the caves. There is no time limit, there is no way to know how deep they are, and there is no way to bring back up if an encounter goes bad, and they will go bad. Pikmin 2 is among the hardest games Nintendo has ever made, and these caves are the reason why. As a kid, I crawled my way through these dark, unending caverns, desperately scraping my way through each encounter with as few fatalities as possible. Caves would take me days, and I didn't even know how to save scum. If something happened, it was permanent. I would leave my GameCube on for days while I did other things because progress on a single floor was that valuable and scary for me. It was a long, challenging game that got me invested in games for the first time. I didn't fully complete it until I was nearly out of high school. By the time I was more active in online culture, I was shocked to see that some people, Pikmin fans, didn't like this game. 20 years later, and there just aren't a lot of games like Pikmin. Even at its core, third-person character-based RTS doesn't sound like a real genre because it's basically just Pikmin. That means that all the fans have really had to do over the years is stew with the 3 games we've had and argue about which one was best. It gets heated, and I am willing to draw blood for the Pikmin 2 cause. It's the same series, but it's clear that people latch on to the elements that make the 2 games distinct and even opposed to each other. To argue that one side is correct is kinda missing the point. It really seems like these games just appeal to different people. But with an audience like that, I imagine making a sequel is a daunting task. But it's Pikmin. As long as it's another one, surely we'd be happy. It's not like the devs are specifically making it their goal to finally bring the debate of Pikmin 1 people versus Pikmin 2 people to an end. That would be ridiculous. They are going to do that and make it the best title for 2023. Pikmin 4 is one of the most carefully crafted sequels that I've ever played, on top of being one of the most feature-rich titles released in a while. Nothing is left out of this game, and nothing in it is wasted. I love all the ways that Pikmin 4 is new. The economy and progression is incredibly satisfying and makes the end of the day just as exciting as the beginning. The new camera controls make all the details in the world that were only implied in previous titles that much easier to absorb, and the dynamic music is as beautiful as it is impressive from a technical perspective. Night Expeditions take Pikmin gameplay and seamlessly turns it into a tower defense, and Ō-Chi. Aside from being the goodest boy of 2023, Ō-Chi completely turns Pikmin on its head. He's fast and extremely mobile through all terrain options, making exploration effortless. He also jumps, making verticality yet another second nature aspect to level design. Navigation in previous Pikmin games was a challenge unto itself, especially with the first two games. Pikmin would run at different speeds and get stuck on corners and edges, sometimes even leading to fatality. It was a mode of gameplay that still has its charm, but compacting your whole squad onto Ō-Chi allows for other things to take priority and give the level design room to breathe. Ō-Chi is also deadly. Not only can he put a good dent into enemies on his own, he can weaponize your team in an instant, making encounters that would take several minutes and significantly endanger your squad instantaneous. Everything is faster paced when Ō-Chi is involved. I would say this departure is too far from Pikmin's typical formula, but Ō-Chi isn't a wholly new thing. He's also your second captain, meaning your main captain is left to fall back onto the modes of movement and combat from previous entries. The new stuff is great, except for the auto-target you can't turn off. But it's this consideration of the past game that makes this my game of the year. There were a lot of sequels this year, and the ones I played, there was a wide gap when it came to how to adapt the previous games in the series to a new entry. Pikmin 4 feels like it spent the most time on this aspect of itself, more than all of the other sequels this year, including the sequel that literally had to reuse the map in an exploration-based game. The one most persistently on my mind was what they were taking from Pikmin 2. It was the black sheep of the franchise and my favorite game of all time. Their answer seemed to come down to the same thing it originally did: the caves. The caves are back, and surprisingly little was changed in the 20-year adaptation. I think the little advantages like the pack items, glow Pikmin, and Ō-Chi were enough to take some of the strain off the players and refocus them on the strategy. It is still an emotional journey, going even deeper and getting even more challenging with your squad. Having caves back reminds me just how wonderful they are at breaking up the pacing. Going from the larger scale management of the overworld to the more lax yet concise challenges in the caves is an excellent back and forth. The caves are the most obvious aspects 4 brings from 2, but I think what's more impactful is the progression. 2 doesn't come off as a game about character progression, but having each cave grant you a perk or ability really impacted how you went about playing the rest of the game and made the caves even more exciting to get to. Most of the things in the shop in 4 are direct analogs to items found in Pikmin 2 caves. Pikmin 4 could stand on its own with just the new ideas it brought to the table, but instead it wanted to evaluate everything the previous games had to offer and incorporate those too. The strange thing about 4 is that it's a lot closer to a reboot than most sequels. It goes out of its way to retcon some of the story we knew and wants to posit itself as the main game to play to get into the Pikmin experience. It's not exactly trying to replace them. If Nintendo was uncomfortable with the idea of people playing the older titles, they wouldn't have re-released the first 2 games months within 4's release. Now, for all my love of those games, you might think that it would bother me that 4 is rewriting them out, but it really doesn't. 4 isn't what comes after 1, 2, and 3, it's what happens when you combine them all. and with that, some starting over is required. Honestly, I would be sad if the series moved on while disregarding my favorite entries. 4 gets around this by taking all of the elements you would want to see with it. Is the story still different? Yeah, but everything is still there. No one can seem to land on this planet, perhaps because of some force or curse. Olimar is still the first survivor and pioneer of Pikmin cultivation. He still works for an opportunistic freight company willing to throw its employees into the maws of danger for a quick buck. And the sight, sound, and feel of Pikmin is still here. Everything, from the things you would expect to the strangest depths of the series you thought for sure were artifacts of the past. Even the feelings. Pikmin 4 knew what we felt when we played the earlier games, and in some cases doesn't even try to adapt. It just brings those experiences back. Some caves are pulled directly from Pikmin 2. Why improve on perfection? And Pikmin 1? Well, if you know, you know, but let's just say 4 is dedicated to adapting what was so special about the first game. So that's far too many words on why Pikmin 4 was my game of 2023. I love Pikmin and I was always going to love 4 because of that, but I have scarcely seen a sequel that understands its own franchise as much as 4. It's weird to say that such an indulgent, nostalgic look back like this was refreshing, but elsewhere it seems like there is a non-stop stream of looking back without the learning and innovation that's supposed to come with it. Pikmin 4 would have been worth it if we had to wait another 10 years, but with it out, I can say I'm excited for what the future holds. That's 2023. It was an amazing year for games and a big year for me. I really appreciate everyone that watched and subscribed getting me this far, and I hope there are even more of you when I say something about 2024. I'll see you in the next one.